She's standing at the head of the conference table right now, smiling like she built something. Like those 6 months of late nights and weekend research and strategy documents revised 17 times came from her brain instead of mine. Her name is Victoria, 27 years old, MBA from Northwestern, 3 months at the company. She's wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and she's holding a presentation deck that I created, speaking words I wrote, claiming credit for ideas I generated while she was still interviewing. I'm sitting in the corner, third row back, not at the table, not close enough to be acknowledged, but close enough to hear every word, close enough to watch. The investors are already here. 4 of them. Serious faces, expensive watches, the kind of people who've heard 1,000 pitches and funded maybe 12. They're worth approximately $700 million combined. They're considering a $28 million investment in our company. And Victoria is presenting my strategy as the reason they should write that check. My name is Raymond. I'm 43 years old. I've been Director of Strategic Planning at Pinnacle Growth Partners for 9 years. I built the expansion strategy she's currently presenting. Every market analysis, every growth projection, every risk assessment, every single word. And nobody in this room except me knows that. 3 months ago, our CEO asked me to develop a comprehensive growth strategy, 6 months timeline, full market analysis, competitive positioning, revenue projections, risk mitigation. Everything an investor would need to see before committing serious capital. I worked on it every day, stayed late most nights, came in on weekends, interviewed 23 industry contacts, analyzed 14 competitor strategies, built financial models that accounted for 37 different variables. It was the most thorough strategic analysis I'd ever produced. 2 weeks before the presentation was scheduled, Victoria joined the company. New hire, Assistant Director of Business Development. The CEO introduced her in a company meeting, said she came highly recommended, had impressive credentials, would be a valuable addition to the leadership team. She sat 3 desks away from me. Friendly enough. Asked good questions. Seemed eager to learn. I didn't think much of it. 4 days before the investor presentation, the CEO called me into his office. Raymond, I'm making a change to the presentation schedule. I looked at him. What kind of change? Victoria is going to handle the investor pitch. The words didn't make sense at first. Just sounds without meaning. Victoria's been here 12 days. I know, but she has presentation experience with investor groups. You're more of a behind-the-scenes strategist. This is about putting our best foot forward. I developed the entire strategy, and you did excellent work. Victoria will present it. You'll be there as technical support if detailed questions come up. Technical support. 6 months of work reduced to backup in case she couldn't answer something. I'd prefer to present my own work, I said carefully. This isn't negotiable, Raymond. The decision's made. Share the presentation files with Victoria. Brief her on the key points. Make sure she's prepared. That was it. Meeting over. 9 years of being the strategy person, and suddenly I was too behind the scenes to present my own analysis. I walked back to my desk and found Victoria waiting. Hey, she said, that practiced enthusiasm. I heard the news. This is so exciting. I'd love to get your files and pick your brain about the strategy. I looked at her. Really looked at her, trying to figure out if she'd asked for this, if she'd positioned herself somehow, if this was calculation or just opportunity. When do you need the files? I asked. Today, if possible. I want to start reviewing everything tonight. I sent her the complete presentation deck, 47 slides, every piece of analysis, every data point, every strategic recommendation, the product of 6 months of my professional life. She thanked me via email. This is incredible work, really impressive. Can't wait to dive in. The next 3 days, she asked me questions. Constantly. What does this data point mean? How did you calculate this projection? Why did you recommend this market first? Where did this competitive analysis come from? I answered everything, explained my methodology, walked her through my reasoning, showed her the research that supported every conclusion. I thought I was helping her present my work accurately. I didn't realize I was teaching her how to claim it as her own. Yesterday, she sent the CEO a revised version of the presentation. I wasn't copied. I found out because our executive assistant mentioned it. Victoria really enhanced your strategy, she said. Added some great visual elements. I pulled up the file from the shared drive. She'd changed the footer. Where it had said, prepared by Raymond Chen, Director of Strategic Planning, it now said, prepared by Victoria Hayes, Assistant Director of Business Development. My name was gone, completely, like I'd never touched it. I went to the CEO's office. Victoria removed my attribution from the presentation. He looked up from his computer, annoyed at the interruption. What? The presentation file. She changed the attribution. It now lists her as the sole preparer. Raymond, this really isn't the time for ego issues. The presentation is tomorrow. We need to be focused. This isn't ego. I spent 6 months developing that strategy. My name should be on the work. Your name will be in the acknowledgements. Victoria's name is on the presentation because she's presenting it. That's standard practice. Standard practice is crediting the person who did the work. His expression hardened. I don't have time for this. The decision is made. Victoria presents tomorrow. You'll be there as support. End of discussion. I walked out, went back to my desk, sat there for maybe 20 minutes just processing. Then I did something I'd never done in 9 years at this company. I went home early, didn't tell anyone, just left. My wife knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. What happened? I told her everything. The strategy, the presentation, Victoria, the attribution, the CEO's dismissal. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, are you going to the presentation tomorrow? I have to. CEO expects me there as technical support. You could call in sick and look petty, like I can't handle not being the center of attention. Raymond, she stole your work. She presented my work. There's a difference. Is there? I didn't have an answer for that. That night, I barely slept. Kept thinking about all the ways I should have handled it differently. Should have insisted on presenting. Should have documented my ownership more explicitly. Should have seen this coming. Around 3 a.m., I realized something. I was angry at the wrong things. I wasn't angry that Victoria was presenting. I was angry that she'd erased me. That she'd taken something I'd built and claimed it as her own creation. There's a difference between presenting someone else's work and pretending you created it. And Victoria had crossed that line completely. Stop the video right here and ask yourself something. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work? Not just present it, but actually claim they created it? If that's happened to you, comment stolen below. Because what happened in that investor meeting, what I watched unfold, only worked because she made one critical mistake. She believed her own lie. And that's when lies become visible. This morning, I got to the office an hour early. Not because I needed to prepare, because I wanted to be there. Wanted to see this. The conference room was already set up. Large screen, presentation loaded, chairs arranged around the long table, coffee and pastries on the side table. Everything professional, everything ready. Victoria arrived 30 minutes before the meeting. I watched her through the glass wall. She was reviewing the slides on her laptop, lips moving slightly like she was rehearsing. Nervous energy. The kind that comes from knowing something important is about to happen. The investors arrived exactly on time. 4 of them, 3 men, 1 woman, all in expensive suits. All with that particular expression of people who've heard too many pitches to be easily impressed. Our CEO greeted them, made introductions, offered coffee, the usual pre-meeting small talk that nobody means. Then everyone sat down, the CEO at the head of the table, the 4 investors along one side, Victoria at the presentation screen, and me, 3 rows back, where I'd been told to sit. Technical support, background presence. Thank you all for coming, the CEO began. We're excited to share our growth strategy with you. Leading this presentation is Victoria Hayes, our Assistant Director of Business Development. Victoria joined us recently from a strategic consulting background and has been instrumental in developing this expansion plan. Instrumental. 3 weeks. She'd been instrumental in 3 weeks. Victoria stood up, that practiced smile. Thank you everyone for being here. Over the past 6 months, I've been developing a comprehensive growth strategy for Pinnacle Growth Partners. Over the past 6 months, she said it so smoothly, so confidently, like she actually believed it. This strategy identifies 3 primary expansion markets, analyzes competitive positioning, and projects revenue growth of 47% over 3 years. All my words, my analysis, my projections. She clicked to the next slide, market overview, data I'd spent 2 weeks compiling. I began by analyzing market size and growth trajectories across 7 potential regions. After extensive research, 3 markets emerged as optimal targets. I began. After extensive research. She was claiming not just the presentation, but the entire research process. One of the investors, older man with silver hair, leaned forward slightly. What methodology did you use for the market analysis? Victoria didn't hesitate. I conducted a comprehensive review of industry reports, competitive filings, and growth indicators, then cross-referenced with demographic data and purchasing power metrics. Textbook answer. Generic enough to sound competent without being specific enough to require deep knowledge. The investor nodded. Victoria continued. She moved through the slides confidently, talked about market opportunity, discussed competitive landscape, presented revenue projections. All of it in my words, my structure, my logic. And it was working. The investors were engaged, taking notes, asking occasional questions that Victoria handled with practiced vagueness. How did you weight the risk factors in your decision matrix? I used a balanced approach considering market volatility, competitive intensity, and regulatory environment. Not wrong, just not detailed, not showing the actual 23-variable model I'd built. 15 minutes in, I realized what she was doing. She was staying at the surface level, presenting the conclusions without diving into the methodology, showing the what without explaining the how. It's what you do when you're presenting someone else's work. You can repeat their conclusions. You just can't explain how they got there. 20 minutes in, one of the investors, a woman probably in her 50s, asked a different kind of question. Can you walk us through how you calculated the customer acquisition cost in the second market? Victoria paused. Just for a second, the CAC calculation follows industry standard methodology. I understand, the investor said, but your projection shows a 32% decrease in CAC by year 2. That's aggressive. How did you arrive at that specific number? Victoria clicked back to the slide. It's based on economies of scale as market presence increases. Yes, but specifically, what variables drove the 32% figure? Another pause, longer this time. I analyzed historical data on scaling efficiency and projected forward based on our expected growth curve. The investor looked at her notes. Your competitor analysis shows similar companies achieving only 18 to 22% CAC improvement. Why would your projection exceed that? Victoria's smile got slightly tighter. Our strategy incorporates several innovative approaches that differentiate us from standard competitor models. Such as? Well, Victoria said, and for the first time, I heard uncertainty in her voice. We're implementing a multi-channel approach that maximizes reach while minimizing cost per impression. Generic, safe, empty. The investor wrote something down. Didn't look impressed. Victoria moved to the next slide, tried to regain momentum, talked about revenue projections, presented growth curves. Another investor, younger man with sharp eyes, interrupted. These projections show consistent 47% growth across 3 years. But your risk assessment identifies significant market variables. How does 47% remain constant despite those variables? The projection accounts for variability within the model, Victoria said. How specifically? Through statistical normalization of risk factors. The investor's expression didn't change. Can you elaborate on what risk factors you normalized and how? Victoria looked at the slide, at her notes, back at the investor. The model incorporates multiple scenarios with weighted probability distributions. Yes, I can see that from the slide. I'm asking how you determine the weights. Silence. Victoria looked at the CEO. I'd need to pull up the detailed modeling spreadsheet to show you the exact formula. That's fine, the investor said. We can wait. Victoria's hands moved to her laptop. She clicked through files, opened folders, her movements getting slightly faster, slightly less controlled. Actually, she said, after maybe 20 seconds, the detailed model is on my office computer. I have the summary results here, but not the underlying calculations. The investor leaned back. You don't have your own work files? I have the presentation. The technical details are in supporting documents. Supporting documents you created. Yes, but don't have with you. Victoria's face was getting slightly flushed. The presentation summarizes the key findings. The detailed methodology is documented separately. Here's something nobody tells you about watching someone take credit for your work. Part of you wants them to succeed because you're proud of what you built. Another part wants them to fail because they stole it. And then there's a third part, the part that just wants the truth to matter. If you've ever felt that exact conflict, that weird mix of pride and anger and just wanting honesty, comment truth below, because that's where I was sitting, watching my work presented badly by someone who didn't understand it. The presentation continued, but something had changed. The investors were asking different questions now, deeper questions, testing questions. Your competitive analysis identifies 4 major competitors. How did you determine market share distribution? Through analysis of public filings and industry reports. Which specific reports? Victoria named 2 general industry publications, basic sources. not the 14 specialized reports I'd actually used. The investor made a note. Not the good kind. Your expansion timeline shows market entry in phases. What drove the sequencing decision? Strategic prioritization based on opportunity assessment. Yes, but what made Market 1 a higher priority than Market 2? Market size and growth potential. Market 2 has larger size according to your own data, so it must be growth potential. What growth rate differential justified the prioritization? Victoria looked at the slide. Market 1 shows stronger growth indicators. What indicators specifically? Demographics, purchasing power, competitive intensity. The investor waited. Victoria didn't continue. And those indicators showed what exactly? That Market 1 represents our optimal initial entry point. We were 40 minutes into the presentation. Victoria was repeating conclusions without being able to explain reasoning, and the investors were noticing. I could see it in their faces. The shift from engaged to skeptical, from interested to suspicious, from considering an investment to questioning whether the person presenting actually understood what she was presenting. Another investor, the one who'd been mostly quiet, spoke up. I'm looking at your risk mitigation strategy. You identify regulatory changes as a significant risk, but rate the probability as low. Given the current political environment and pending legislation, how did you arrive at that assessment? Victoria paused. Based on current regulatory trends. Current trends show increasing regulation in all three markets. Your assessment seems to contradict that. It's a balanced view considering historical patterns. What historical patterns? Regulatory cycles tend to moderate over time. The investor glanced at his colleagues. That's not what the data shows. Regulatory intensity has increased consistently for 6 years across all three markets. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. The risk assessment considers multiple factors beyond just current trends. What factors? Industry advocacy, political climate, precedent analysis. And those factors led you to rate probability as low despite contradicting data? It's a judgment based on holistic analysis. The CEO intervened. Perhaps Raymond can speak to the detailed methodology. He provided technical support on the analysis. Every eye in the room turned to me, including Victoria's. Her expression was difficult to read, part relief, part panic. I stood up slowly, walked to the front of the room, stood next to Victoria. Raymond's our director of strategic planning, the CEO said. He can address the technical details. I looked at Victoria. She looked at me. In that moment, I made a choice. The regulatory risk assessment is actually based on detailed analysis of pending legislation in all three markets, I said. We tracked 17 separate regulatory proposals, analyzed their progress, and assigned probability weights based on political composition of relevant committees, industry lobbying effectiveness, and historical passage rates for similar legislation. The investor nodded. That makes more sense. The low probability rating came from the fact that 12 of the 17 proposals lack sufficient support to advance. The 5 that might pass would have minimal impact on our operations based on business model analysis. Can you show us that analysis? Absolutely. I moved to Victoria's laptop, opened a different file from my research folder, pulled up the regulatory tracking spreadsheet. 23 tabs, color-coded, complete with probability calculations. The investors leaned forward. This was what they wanted. Details, methodology, proof that someone actually understood what they were presenting. I walked them through it. 5 minutes of detailed explanation. Showed how I'd weighted each variable, how I'd calculated probabilities, how I'd arrived at conclusions. When I finished, the lead investor said, "That's thorough analysis." I nodded, stepped back, let Victoria retake her position. She tried to continue, clicked to the next slide, started talking about implementation timeline. But another investor interrupted. Can Raymond walk us through the financial projections as well? I have questions about the revenue model. The CEO looked uncomfortable. Raymond can certainly support, but Victoria developed the overall strategy. Actually, the investor said, voice polite but firm, I'd prefer to hear from whoever did the detailed modeling. These are technical questions that require technical answers. Victoria's face was carefully neutral, but I saw her hands. They were shaking slightly. Raymond, the CEO said, resigned. Can you address the financial model? I could have said no, could have deferred back to Victoria, could have let her struggle. Instead, I walked to the laptop, pulled up the financial model, 47 tabs, 378 formulas, 6 months of work. And I answered every question, explained every assumption, walked through every calculation, showed them exactly how I'd built projections that were aggressive but defensible, ambitious but achievable. The investors asked 12 more questions. I answered all of them, with details, with data, with the confidence that comes from actually understanding what you built. Victoria stood to the side, silent, her presentation taken over by the person who'd actually created it. When I finished, the lead investor said, "This is exactly the level of rigor we look for. Comprehensive analysis, defendable assumptions, transparent methodology." He looked at the CEO. "We're very interested in moving forward, but we'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss implementation details," with Raymond leading that conversation. The CEO smiled, tightly. "Of course, that can be arranged." The meeting ended. The investors left. The CEO left. Victoria gathered her things quickly, didn't look at me, walked out. I was left alone in the conference room, my presentation still on the screen, my work validated, my expertise acknowledged. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. My phone buzzed. Text from the executive assistant, "CEO wants to see you." I walked to his office. He was standing at his window, back to the door. "Close it," he said. I closed the door. He turned around. That was humiliating. For who? For Victoria. For me. For the company's leadership credibility. The investors got the detailed analysis they needed. They got to watch an assistant director flounder while a director took over her presentation. That's not the image we wanted to project. Then maybe the assistant director shouldn't have been presenting the director's work. His jaw tightened. I made a strategic decision about presentation optics. You made a decision that backfired. The investors saw through it immediately. They wanted to talk to whoever actually built the analysis. Because you undermined her. I stared at him. I answered questions she couldn't answer. Because she didn't do the work. She presented the strategy. She read my slides. There's a difference. He sat down heavily. The investors want another meeting with you leading. I know. Victoria's going to be there. Fine. Raymond, I need you to understand something. I brought Victoria in for a reason. She has connections, background, potential that could benefit this company long term. Then let her develop her own strategies, not steal mine. She didn't steal anything. She presented work under our company umbrella. That's how these things work. She removed my name from the attribution. She claimed she spent 6 months developing strategy she'd seen for 3 weeks. That's not how things work. That's theft. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? I want credit for my own work. I want my name on what I create. I want to present my own analysis to investors who are making decisions based on it. For this next meeting, you'll present. And Victoria will be there as your support. That's not going to work. It's going to have to work. We need both of you for the close. I left his office, went back to my desk, pulled up the presentation file, changed the attribution back to my name. Then I created a new version, a more detailed version, with every piece of analysis, every data source, every calculation, everything someone would need to truly understand the strategy. 2 versions. One that Victoria could present, one that I could actually explain. If you've watched this far, you already know how this ends. But before we get there, I want you to understand something about corporate revenge. It's not about humiliation or destruction. It's about truth winning against lies. It's about making the work speak louder than the theft. If you believe that eventually, quality defeats fraud, comment quality below. Because what happened in the next 2 weeks proved that sometimes the best revenge is just being undeniably good at what you do. The follow-up meeting happened 2 weeks later. Different investors, additional stakeholders, bigger room. This time, the email invitation listed me as presenter, Victoria as support. She didn't speak to me in those 2 weeks, avoided eye contact in meetings, left rooms when I entered. The morning of the presentation, I arrived early again, set up my laptop, loaded my detailed version. Victoria arrived just before the meeting started, sat in the back row, where I'd sat last time. The CEO introduced me. Raymond will be walking you through the detailed strategic analysis today. He's been with us for 9 years and brings deep expertise in growth planning. I stood up, started presenting, not Victoria's surface-level version, the real version, with methodology, with data sources, with calculations visible. I presented for 70 minutes, answered every question, showed every detail, proved every conclusion. The investors approved the $28 million investment. After the meeting, the lead investor pulled me aside, That first presentation, the one your colleague gave, we almost passed. Why didn't you? Because when we asked detailed questions, you had detailed answers. That told us someone actually understood what they were building. We just weren't sure who. And now? Now we know. And frankly, we're more confident because of it. 2 days later, I was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Planning. 22% salary increase. Direct report to the CEO. Victoria resigned the following week, took a position at a smaller firm. I heard through the office gossip network that she'd claimed the strategy work on her resume. I also heard that her new employer called our CEO for a reference. I don't know what he said, but I know she didn't last 6 months there. 6 months after the investment closed, I ran into her at an industry conference. We saw each other across the lobby. She looked away, kept walking. I didn't follow. Sometimes revenge isn't what you do. It's what you let happen. It's letting truth move faster than lies. It's letting competence expose fraud. Victoria tried to build a reputation on work she didn't do. And eventually, everyone who mattered figured it out. Not because I destroyed her, because she destroyed herself the moment she believed she could present my work without understanding it. The investors didn't reject her because of me. They rejected her because she couldn't answer their questions. Because when you claim you built something, people expect you to know how it works. Today, I'm still at Pinnacle Growth Partners, still developing strategies, still presenting them myself, still getting my name on what I create. And every time I present now, I think about that first investor meeting, about watching someone claim my work, about the moment the question started and she couldn't answer, about the look on her face when she realized that presenting work and understanding work are two completely different things, and that eventually, in rooms that matter, the difference becomes obvious.